Hello, my name is Robert Ryan and I am Managing Director for a building consultancy company called Ryan Consultants. Today I'm here to talk to you about our role in the project on the new School of Architecture, Design and Construction in Stockwell Street, Greenwich, London. Stockwell Street project is a brand new building and will become the new home for Greenwich University School of Architecture and Construction, currently housed at the Avery Hill campus in Elton, 4.5 miles from the new site. The Stockwell Street site was purchased by our client in 2009. The area where the building will sit is a brownfield site measuring some 15,000 square metres. Facilities will include a library, lecture theatres, academic buildings, exhibition spaces, TV studios and a retail space including a cafe. The project has cost £45 million and the main contractor on site are Osborne Limited. The completed building is due to finish in July 2014. The subsequent fit-out works by various contractors will then be completed for the 15th of September 2014. Major planning and design has been carried out to get to this stage of the project as our client's new home will be on a World Heritage Site amongst listed buildings, as well as the area being one of conservation. Other major issues that have been a big influence in the design and planning process included the neighbouring land owned by Network Rail, the local residential area, as well as the local commercial neighbours. Our client is the Maritime Facilities Management team who work for the University of Greenwich. We have been employed to offer advice on methodologies for handover, occupation and asset management. Today is our Stage 1 presentation in which I identify and analyse the project stakeholders. This will then enable us to present our recommendation on prioritisation and mitigation of the identified stakeholders, including the key elements of communication that will be required for the different stakeholder groups. Stakeholders. To begin, it is important to recognise what exactly we are talking about when we mention the term stakeholders. A few common definitions at this stage help us understand who we are talking about in a general sense. A project stakeholder is a person or organisation who have a vested interest in the success of a project and the environment within which it operates. The implication is that a stakeholder is any group or individual with the power to be a threat or a benefit to the project. Once every possible stakeholder has been identified, the number one objective is to acknowledge demands through appropriate dialogue and communication. We at Ryan Consultants fully appreciate a construction project such as the Stockwell Street project can affect different stakeholders in different ways. What can be of great use to one stakeholder may in fact be have a negative impact on another. Stakeholder mapping. Stakeholder mapping is a collaborative process of research, debate and discussion that draws from multiple perspectives to determine a key list of stakeholders across the entire stakeholder spectrum. Mapping can be broken down into 4 phases. 1. Identifying. The first step in the mapping process is to understand that there is no magic list of stakeholders. Research and thorough investigation as to who the stakeholders are take time and effort. There is no final list, and specifically with a construction process such as the Stockwell Street project, the list will not remain static. The list will change as the building nears completion and as stakeholders themselves make decisions or change their opinions. 2. Analysing. Once we have identified a list of stakeholders for our client, it is useful to do further analysis to better understand their relevance and the perspective they offer, in addition to understanding their relationship with the new university building. From this we will offer analysis on what to prioritise based on the relative usefulness for this engagement. 3. Mapping. Mapping stakeholders is a visual exercise and analysis tool that we will use to further determine which stakeholders are most useful to engage with. Mapping allows us to see where stakeholders stand when evaluated by the same key criteria and compared to each other. 4. Prioritising. Prioritising is not practical and usually not necessary to engage with all stakeholder groups with the same level of intensity all of the time. Being strategic and clear about whom our client should engage with and why before jumping in can help save them both time and money. Stakeholder identification. Identifying can be defined as the process of listing relevant groups, organisations and people connected to the project. Once identified, parties are split into internal stakeholders and external stakeholder groups. Internal stakeholders are commonly people who are already committed to serving the organisation or university in this case, such as board members, staff, volunteers and or donors. External stakeholders are commonly people who are impacted by the work, such as clients, consultants, community partners and others. It is important to get the perspective of both groups. The stakeholders can then be split into two further groups within the internal and external umbrellas. Internal stakeholders can be split into two groups: client demand and client supply. Stakeholders such as funding bodies, end users, tenants or suppliers are some of the types that form the client demand. The construction team, including designers, contractors and suppliers, are examples of the client supply. External stakeholders are then split into two groups: legislative and private third parties. Stakeholders such as local government and regulatory bodies are examples of legislative stakeholders, whilst residents, local commercial neighbours and political bodies make up some of the private third parties. Identifying the project stakeholders. As part of our consultation process, specifically on the Stockwell Street project, we have identified 40 different stakeholders that are still actively involved in the project at this current moment in time. All 40 stakeholders identified have been put into their internal and external groups, as seen here. These range from University Court of Governors in the client demand list, onto Osborne the contractor, still on site in the client supply list, through to the neighbours network rail on the external private third party list, all the way through to the local authority building control in the external legislative list. A detailed and thorough list of all 40 stakeholders can be found on this slide 6 of this presentation. Key stakeholders. Key stakeholders are the people or groups that have the biggest influence or interest in the new Stockwell Street project. They can also be described as the people that are directly influential or will be directly impacted because of the new building. The key stakeholders will change on a regular basis at this stage of the project, such as the Stockwell Street building. The key stakeholders will more often than not have a direct relationship with our client, the University of Greenwich. From the 40 stakeholders we have identified as having an interest in the project still, at this very moment in time, when the handover of the finished building is the objective, key stakeholders make up 10%. These being the main contractor Osborne, the University's Board of Governors, the University's Project Management Team and the CDM Coordinator. As mentioned, the stakeholders will change with the progression of the project. Come what September, the key stakeholders will have increased, with parties that were key taking on different importance. Analysing the stakeholders. Now that we've established who the stakeholders are, what their relationship is with other stakeholders, plus their relevance in the project, it's time to work out their power or interest in the project. Power of a stakeholder is defined as the extent to which they are able to persuade, induce or coerce others into following certain courses of action. There are several ways to exert such power, for instance by direct authority, lobbying or exerting a dominant market position. Analysis of interest and power. Beside the analysis of a stakeholder power in terms of their ability to influence people and developments, it is also necessary to evaluate how likely and to which extent the stakeholders will exert these powers. The power interest matrix. The power interest matrix is a useful tool, as seen here, for evaluating the expectations and impacts of particular stakeholders. It analyses the following questions. How interested is each stakeholder group to impress its expectations on the university's decision? Do they have the means to do so? Do they have the power to do so? In the result, the power interest matrix provides valuable information on how to handle particular stakeholders and groups. It can also indicate if certain decisions will receive support or resistance, and which groups have to become included in the decision process. For example, a stakeholder with a low power and high interest would be put in the keep informed box. Stakeholders in section titled minimal effort have neither a high own interest in the project, nor do they have a high power to exert much impact. Stakeholders in the section titled Keep Informed have a high interest in the project and its actions, however they have limited means to influence things. The relationship with the stakeholders in the section named Keep Satisfied can prove to be testing and difficult. In this group we find the stakeholders with low level of interest in the project but with a high level of power. The fourth and final group are the most important stakeholders in the project, and these are those with the high interest and a high level of power. These are found in the section called Key Players. To illustrate an example of each group, we have carried out analysis of every stakeholder we identified for the Stockwell Street project and placed them in their relevant groups from the four just described. Group A, minimal effort group. For example, the fire engineer is an example of a stakeholder with low interest in this project at this stage and with low power. We would advise our client to keep these stakeholders in the group informed in the necessary extent, but should not invest too much effort into them. Group D, key players. The University of Greenwich Court of Governors are an example of a stakeholder with high interest and high power in the project at this stage. We strongly advise our client that this group of stakeholders have to be up to date and kept abreast of every relevant development. Group B, keep informed. New full-time students are an example of a stakeholder with a high level of interest in the project yet low power. Despite their low power, such stakeholders could be valuable allies in important decisions. Therefore, we advise our client to keep them informed about the issues they are interested in. And finally, Group C, keep satisfied. Building control officers are an example of a stakeholder who fall into this category with a low level of interest in the project but with a high level of power. They behave passively most of the time, however they can exert enormous impact on the project, for example by signing off the building control certificates. It is therefore necessary to analyse potential intentions and reactions of these stakeholders in all major developments and to involve them according to their interests. Mitigation. In legal terms, mitigation is the opposite of an aggravation. Mitigate is to soothe or to lessen the effect of something. In terms of mitigation of stakeholder issues, it is important that a clear communication strategy is put in place. The communication must be clear and concise, and most importantly, it must address the demands of the stakeholder. It is important to point out at this point that our client must be prepared to adapt to each stakeholder individually, as there is no one-fits-all approach to any mitigation of stakeholder issues. We have made it clear to our client that the following points are followed to ensure any potential problems or issues from stakeholders are best mitigated. 1. Relationships are built with stakeholder groups. 2. Identification of supporters and opponents of a project. 3. Necessary repositioning of stakeholders. For example, reduction of power of a major opponent as to move them from one group to another, or alternatively increase interest of a powerful supporter from one group to another. 3. Measures to keep stakeholders in favourable positions. For example, fulfilment of information needs to keep them in the group that they've already been placed in. Nevertheless, every influencing of stakeholders carried out by our client must be done with ethical and legal limits. Communication. The most important part of our client communicating with their stakeholders is ensuring the target audience are identified in the strategy. The worst case scenario would be for our client to have a stakeholder identified too late in the project. This could lead to a critical person or group that have not received any of the communication through the course of the project, and valuable links that need to be addressed are missed. It is important that our client keeps communication active, frequent and ongoing, so there is a strong support for the Stockwell Street project. Different techniques can include open workshops, meetings face-to-face, forums and chat sites, group emails, notice boards, posters, letter drops and social media sites. Now we've identified the general communication strategies and they're in place, it is important that group-specific methods are identified. Group-specific communication strategies will ensure the right groups are getting the right information, and just as importantly, not getting information they do not need to know. Here are a list of the communication techniques that we have identified for each of the 4 groups. For the minimal effort stakeholders, we've identified notice boards, traditional plus websites, public posters, generic newsletters, and up-to-date info on key milestones happening on the project. For the keep informed stakeholders, we've identified group emails, posters, open forums, and up-to-date information on key milestones of the project. For the keep satisfied stakeholders, we have identified specific meetings on issues, emails relating to specific information and details, verbal one-to-one communication on specific events, and up-to-date programs appropriately linked to specific dates in signing off issues within the building. Finally, the key player stakeholders, we have identified weekly meetings, individual emails, regular verbal discussions, and weekly updates on progress on site as it happens. In summary, we would like to finish by saying we would recommend to our client that the importance of communicating openly, constructively, and with relevance to all stakeholders we have identified is of the most importance. The importance of any one stakeholder's concerns cannot be undermined, and our client must seek to understand and meet the stakeholder information needs. It is important that our client understands and grasps the following key points. Individual stakeholders will change throughout the course of the project in relevance to importance. Power and interest levels of a stakeholder will change as stages progress. Ignoring, not addressing a stakeholder can increase interest and power for the individual, more often in a negative manner. Thank you for listening to my presentation.